Joining us now is Alan Watt. He's a long-term researcher into the causative forces behind major changes in historical development. His background is something of a Renaissance man with background in three professions, various books, religions, philosophy, poetry, and mainly published under pseudonyms. And he's been heavily involved in the music industry and a lot more. Well, overall, Alan's just really one of the most well-researched guys I've ever spoken to in my 5 years here, and I know he can bring us a lot of perspective on various issues. His website is cuttingthroughthematrix.com, and I know there's quite a bit he could get into. Are you there now, Alan?
Yes, hello. Your volume is very low, my end here. Could you...
Alan, can you hear me?
Yeah, just about. You're very, very low.
Okay, guys, if you could turn up his volume while we work on the technical issues. But maybe you could tell us right now what are the most important things you see going on currently, Alan?
Well, it's planned chaos. You've got a world that's supposed to merge into one unifying force and under a government. We keep forgetting that because we get stuck on the chaos they introduce on the way. And we talk about the chaos here, there, everywhere across the world. It's in Greece, it's here, it's there. So I always try to keep my sights on their goal, which, of course, is a unified Europe, which they have. The crises in Europe are simply meant to bond them even further into giving up all sovereignty and bring themselves under one banking system, one bank for the whole of Europe. North America is going through the same chaos because we're the second continent, actually the whole of the Americas, to be integrated. They've just had a meeting, by the way, and they've kept that awfully quiet. And basically, they discussed the borders. That's all they're telling us. And they've given all access access to all Canadians' data to the special security services within the United States. We're being integrated every month, basically, into the next step of the amalgamation. They're trying to do the same with the Far East, Australia, New Zealand, China, Japan. All these countries come under the third bloc. And this is really what it's all about. Carol Quigley talked about this. He said eventually it all comes under the Bank of International Settlements with the IMF running the countries or the blocks or regions. And, of course, a unified government for the world. That's supposed to come out of it all eventually. At the moment, they have to get a single government like Europe set up for the Americas. And this is also part of the chaos we're going through now. Oh, we can't survive on our own. Look at the money situation. We need a unified bank. And that came out in the 80s during the free trade negotiations. They actually talked about putting a central bank for the whole of the Americas at Montreal.
Wow. Can you tell us what's going on right now in Europe with the bailouts and all the stuff happening with Greece and the U.S. Western role in funding it? Well, we'll get to that after the break. We're coming up on the music right now. Stay with us. We have Alan Watt and all of his insights and more coming up. Infowars.com. Stay with us. We are back. This is the Alex Jones Show. It's Monday, September 19th. I'm Aaron Dykes sitting in, and on the line with us is Alan Watt of cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Alan, the question I was trying to put to you before the break is, what's happening now with Germany and France trying to create a new bank over Europe, all to do this ill-advised Greek bailout, and what will the Western countries' role be in paying for that?
Well, we already have a treaty. I don't know if people realize that Canada and the U.S. made a treaty with the EU and to help with the bailouts should they come. We're actually doing it already anyway. That was separate from the NAFTA deal and the European deal. And so we're all in it together. That's the whole idea of this chaos, this planned and well-managed chaos, is to get everyone to their knees until the public say, well, nothing's working, please make it better. And they come forward with their new idea, which is an old idea, very old. They'll dust off the old parchments they've all signed and got ready, and they'll present to the public the plan that was set up even when they created the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Remember, Bretton Woods was part one, and the founder of it said there'll be a part two after he's dead, which is about now. And we're going through part two now. The idea is that a central bank must be set up for each one of these amalgamated, basically continents. North America, Europe, and one for the Far East as well. They'll have subsidiary banks, of course, for they won't call them national governments anymore, but the partners within the region. And this is simply part two Bretton Woods we're going into with the central bank. And again, Quigley talked about that from the Council on Foreign Relations, from their own history records. That was the whole intention for 100 years, was to set up a supreme bank for the planet and a central bank for each one of the amalgamated continents, basically. Yeah.
Right. Well, amalgamation would be the key word, consolidation. We know the IMF with the third world, it's been so much more about conditionalities than anything to do with the debt. That's just sort of the inciting incident to get the country on the line, and then the hook is total takeover, and now that's happening in Europe, no?
Yeah. Well, the whole idea of the IMF is not to help third world countries. Never was. It was simply to start off with foreign aid. That was the con with foreign aid. And you give them foreign aid, you give them loans, you get them into trouble, they can't pay them back. And you go in and you grab all of the resources. That was the plan of the banks. And we must remember that even Rockefeller said the same thing, that we can't depend on national governments anymore. He said it's far better that an intelligent force, intelligentsia, and bankers who are used to dealing with economies run the world rather than leave it to the national interest groups to steer the way they want to go and into chaos and wars. That was his excuse for it. But of course, it was even older than him, this plan. And we're going through it now. And they've already announced in the IMF in Europe that they want the right, in fact, they've taken the right of some countries to start to do all of their financing for them. That's reading their books, doing their books, not leaving it to their own governments to do so. The IMF wants the power to be the big chief, basically, who will do every member's books. That's all of your economy and what goes to welfare, what goes to social security, healthcare, all of those things. It wants the sole right to do all that and do away with that part of your government back home. Yeah.
And when are we going to openly see the IMF on the United States, preying on our own country here and on Canada and the rest of the West?
I don't think it'll be too long now, because they're not fools at the top. We think it's all about greed. But it's not. That's a big part of it, because they're allowed to reward themselves very well at the top. And they planned, of course, the bank crash. You can't take the reins of observation off of banks and let them go to it without them just simply ripping the whole continent off, which they did with their mortgage crisis, etc. But they planned to bring it down. You've got to get big changes happening. You've got to create chaos. And financial chaos is the easiest and the most powerful way to do it. And then that's when the public knows. They say, everything's broken, it's not working, please help us. So we turn around to the government, the ones who are abusing us, and ask them to make it better. And they come out with their plans. That's exactly what they're doing right now. And as I say, most of it, unfortunately, in America, is kept fairly quiet from the mainstream media, because the media barons, that's their job, is to control all information to the public. Nothing about informing us about truth or anything. It's about media, it's about really factual retention to themselves. But they've had that big meeting, as I say, and another 2 or 3 to go. And by 2012, they want the Americans to be amalgamated. We've watched them since 2005 openly meeting together, 2 presidents and a prime minister from Mexico, U.S. and Canada, signing agreements. They said that 5 to do. That was 2010, 5 major ones. And because there was such a backlash amongst those in the know, especially in Canada, and protests, they kept it quiet from then on, except for little bits in the paper. But they've just had another meeting. They go down separately now into Latin America and sign these charters separately, instead of going down as the 3 amigos that they used to do. And they sign the charters, and they're talking about amalgamations, and sharing our economies. That's also sharing your tax base, basically. All imports, exports. We're already doing that under the last big deal they signed with U.S. and Canada. We're sharing a lot of tariffs for imports and exports. People in the federal government in Canada, bureaucrats, can actually apply for jobs in similar positions in the U.S. Federal government, and vice versa. It's been like that for a few years. We are integrating, and all of this chaos is meant to bring it on even more smoothly, setting it up for a smooth transfer. And there's no real shock once we're totally amalgamated. It's all working already, and that's the idea of crisis after crisis. To the public, remember, it's all perception management. It must sound like a logical, if unfortunate thing to do, is to give up all sovereignty and amalgamate into one giant continental system.
Well, controlling chaos, I could see, is your key word today, and it's very appropriate. Just on Friday, we had Mayor Bloomberg predicting that there's going to be riots and economic rebellion if they don't pass the new phony jobs bill. Yeah, just more perception, as you say. Of course, as you know, I know you covered heavily at the time, they've been planning for economic riots for years, since at least 2007, openly in the public documents. The Army War College is written for people to get ready to control these economic riots, and now it's here. Do you see the NFL pat-down measures, bringing TSA-style security to the bus and train and shopping centers as part of that same preparing for the economic collapse, or is that another part of the police state?
It's part of that for sure, but it's also part of this terrorism nonsense is here with us forever now. This is permanent state. And they're simply training the public to adapt. And they will adapt very quickly to the new system of total security, total observation, no bodily rights even to go unmolested anywhere. Even eventually into a supermarket, you probably have a special card with the active chip, and if you don't have it with you, alarms go off, and the security grabs you and takes you off. That's all is slated to come down. We forget, it's long before 2001, they were planning the amalgamation of America with Canada, Mexico. They've got Chile and a few other countries, Brazil, into it. There's quite a few countries actually that brought into the NAFTA agreement quietly. And in Canada, in about 1998, they passed an omnibus anti-terror bill. Nothing was happening in 1998 in Canada. And Alan Rock, the federal government, rammed it through himself, basically. And then he went off to work at the United Nations. And even the journalists in Canada were saying, well, what's this? This is a total martial law situation. What's happening? And no reason was given to the public. And they went back to sleep as always because they didn't see it being put into effect immediately. You've got to remember, too, inside the U.S., that they knew there was coming chaos even back in the 80s and 90s. They've been creating special forces within the U.S. with the police working with troops abroad, getting training back in the 90s. Actually, 2001 was just the kickoff of the next part of the plan. They'd already planned it and were implementing it long before that.
Right. But specifically, what do you have to say now, only 3 years later, really 4 years later, on the revolution, flash mobs, and brain chips part of revealing the plan to come of a revolutionary population, particularly in the Middle East, police state, and the Western countries, Alan?
Well, again, that's why they were creating this big super internal army since the 80s and 90s, the multi-jurisdictional task forces, they call them up here in Canada. They've even shown us the police practicing kicking doors in across the Middle East with the troops so they can come back here and do the same thing one day. So obviously, since they were going to use economics and inflation, unemployment, poverty to bring in this system, hyperinflation, they expect riots. They don't make a move without figuring out every possible reaction from every segment of society, and they plan for that before they even make the move. So there's nothing happening that's not supposed to happen according to those at the top. So they're prepared to deal with mass riots, which they want actually, and the terrorism will gradually be controlling riots, and the people again will adapt into that's really what this massive security system is for. Eventually, over the years, they'll adapt into that and forget all about the terrorists. This is a very old technique, and this is a very old bunch of rulers we're really living under, with archives of how to control whole nations, populations, and so on. Yeah.
Wow, that's just incredible. Alan, we're coming up on the break now, but we have plenty of more time ahead of us. Stay with us. I'm Aaron Dyke, sitting in for Alex Jones. We're back at Infowars.com, and tonight with the Infowars Nightly News.